I am just going and getting our Instagram straightened. Yeah, that's just on me because there we go. Talking. Yes, it's just me clicking. It's totally, guys, like, so I have, there we go. Hopefully everyone can hear me. So if everyone, if you can hear us, let me know, especially on Instagram, because I shut the thing off and I was trying to see if it was going to go or not. But anywho, how is everybody? I hope you're all wonderful. It's been so long. I've been in Kickstarter a place. We're just going to say a place. So we're getting out of there. And what better way to start the year and get back into the groove other than with our wonderful friend Ben Stimpson. So
Hello.
Ben and I have been planning this for a couple months now, like off and on. So I'm so happy it actually is happening. How are you today?
Well, we've got the storm, that's what we're
Storm.
calling it, the
Yes.
storm. So I think it's like all the way down at St. Louis. It comes all the way up to Canada. It's going to be with you soon. So, but I'm doing okay. Yeah, I'm doing okay. I left my good webcam at my office though, so it's flickering, but you can hear me okay, hopefully.
No, we can, yeah, you look perfect. It's totally
Thank you.
fine. It's one of those things, like at this point, any tech, whatever, I'm like, you know what, everybody, we made it through COVID with all this crazy Zoom stuff. If things are a little weird, you're gonna be okay.
Yeah.
Like I can't stress about it anymore. It just can't. I just can't do it. I just nope, don't have it in me.
No.
So we have Ben here today, because he did a thing. Ben did a thing. He wrote this wonderful book.
I did write this wonderful book.
And this cover is just, I
love
this cover so much.
I know.
They did a really good job with it. They did, because
I
it's
was
like,
sorry, go on.
no, go ahead, tell me.
Well, I was concerned. I submitted. I actually so when those who aren't in the publishing world, Llewellyn will ask for your ideas, and so I submitted something, and I was taking a great deal of inspiration from the book cover of Emphasis' Queer Kabbalah book, which had a beautiful tree in the middle, and it was all teal, and it was wonderful. And so I submitted that, and I really liked it, and I liked the idea of the skulls in the tree. So I was really concerned because I know that they have full idea, right? They have it's entirely in their court. So when they sent this to me and I looked at it and I was like sitting with it and I was like, oh, it has like a lovely like 70s sort of like chic vibe to it. And I like that.
Yes.
And yeah, it was cute. I like it.
Yeah, it's super unique. And yeah, like Ben was saying too, you can give your ideas on these things. Like even when I have a tarot deck coming out and they're like, what are your ideas for the cover? But we have full reign on it.
Yeah.
For funsies. So, I mean, I was really lucky. Obviously, you got really lucky with it. And, it's really cool to see that and to see it. And it is funny because it's like when you see, you wrote the whole book. So the inside you're so, about, and you're looked at it until now, like you don't want to look at it anymore. And then the cover comes out and you're like, oh, all right, that's not so bad. It is a cool thing for sure.
Yeah.
So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
It is a process. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Of course. So I am originally from the UK, but I came to Canada when I was 8 years old. I live just in within the radius of Toronto, about 2 hours. And I actually just recently moved from the city back into the country, so I'm in the middle of nowhere land again, which is kind of nice. I love the quiet up here, and I know you know that being in the country yourself, right?
Yeah.
So I've been part of the pagan community for about 20 years now, 21 years now, mostly online. About 10 years ago, I really connected with an in-person community, and since then I've kind of had a whirlwind. I was involved with Lakumi for a while. I practiced the Spiritismo. That's really where the bulk of the experiences with ancestors come from in this book. I'm a therapist, so I trained in therapy, and I recently just finished a BA in medieval and classical and religious studies. which is fun. It really fits in with my folkloric witchcraft and my folklore stuff.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of I've got multiple hats, but they all kind of are connected.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know. I did redo a bio for my website recently, and I'm like sitting there, I'm like, huh, this person sounds kind of cool. Do I even know them? You know?
Right? Like they seem familiar. There's something
Yeah.
there I might know about them. No, it is too, and it's always like with these things. Then you go and you read it, and you're like, oh, you know what? I should probably like update this. And then you
Yeah.
put it, and then you like go away from it, and then you come back to it, and you're like, that's why and that's why like I always just rather ask people like, just tell me about yourself, because sometimes you read the bio and you're just like, oh, and they're like, oh yeah, but this, so it's I just find it's easier, and I know for me it is, so I'm just imposing that onto everybody else, I guess.
I'm gonna steal that. That's a good idea because the number of times I've been sent a bio by publicists or by like other people, and it turns out
Yeah.
that like a really crucial thing is wrong in it. It's like, oh,
Oh, it is, and I've done it a couple times, and I'm like, "F this, I'm done with it." So I take the bio and I post it in the post, right? And then you know what? You're gonna tell me about yourself. I'd rather
perfect.
hear it that way, and it's usually a lot more fun, and it's one of those questions we all hate, but we all ask each
Yeah,
other all the time.
it's true. It's true.
Like, why do we do that to each other? We can't help it. But, I've, been, obviously I follow you on all the things and kind of seeing your
Me too.
journey with school and everything, and congrats to you on that.
Thank you.
It's not easy to kind of do those things, and then
Oh,
everything else on top of it. And,
it's such a
I
weird
feel like we
lifestyle thing.
care
Mhm.
more now too, right? So then it makes it even, more difficult.
Yeah. Well, and this is the thing. I was very lucky with that path because, I like originally when I was in university the first time around, and I ended up dropping out because it was too much. I was studying social work, and
Okay.
that's really where the therapy piece comes in. Like, I went and retrained in I took what I got from that social work program and went and retrained in psychotherapy, which was really really good. That was a nice way of kind of bridging that and bringing it out. But I always I love to learn. I think everybody watching this, like any of the
Mhm.
tarot people, love to learn. Like
Yeah.
that's I'm not special, right? But it was cool to go back because I transferred into a program, so half of the degree was already done. So I only had 2 years to do it,
Yeah.
and because Canadian education is a lot less expensive in the US, I was able to pay as I went. So it was really, really good to be able to pay by semester and pace myself. So I ended up, it was really, really good. And all of my classes are things that I was intentionally interested into. So it
Yeah.
was really neat to, go from like a medieval monsters course into studying Japanese demons in their theater system,
That's
or like,
so cool.
going, it's like, what is all of this,
Right.
So,
Right. Oh, and I love all that stuff. Like, I
yeah.
just think it's really, really cool. And
Mhm.
actually, my youngest son is start school at the end of the month, and he's doing
Mm.
psychology,
Wow,
and
that's
he's
exciting.
super into it. And it's always so funny because, like, I'm a super psychology nerd too, and he
Mhm,
always steals all my books.
mhm.
And I love to that. Like, so now it's like, and the metaphysical and the psychology, they're
It
pretty
all
close
comes
to each
down.
other. So he's
Yeah,
starting to kind of take all those books too. So I just think it's really cool, and I love just the melding of all of that, and that he's interested in it, and that he's really, and it's fun. It's
yeah,
fun. It's a really cool thing. And even if people, I think, that do any sort of magical work or any of that, I think it really benefits them to even just do, it's not, you don't have to go like take courses or anything, but even
mm,
reading a couple books, read
mm,
a book on
absolutely.
body language, you know what I mean? Like, I
Yeah,
just feel like that just is so helpful, when you're doing readings or healings for other people, to, and I feel, and I think some people will say like, it's, oh, well, you're cheating if you do that. I don't really feel like that. I feel
I
like
don't
it's
think so.
more of a, you're able to give a better reading, a deeper healing, when you're able to pick up on those subtle nuances, right?
Very much so, very much so.
Definitely, definitely.
Yeah. Well,
So,
and you can't take psychology away from the occult for metaphysics. I know that that's one criticism of like kind of Western psychology, that
mhm,
it essentializes things and that it makes people really think in terms of like archetypes and unreal like constructs. But
Right.
I think that when you look at the rest of the world, when you look at spirituality in general, right, you can't, like, the nature of the mind is key to that, because that's the gateway to the soul, right, in many traditions, right? So it's interesting. But I mean, look at, like, in fiction, like Terry Pratchett's witches using headology, right? I'm a witch because I wear a witch's hat, and my witch's hat is a witch's hat because I'm a witch, right? Psychology, right?
It is. It is.
Yeah.
It's pretty awesome. And I think even rolling that into the ancestral work too,
Mhm.
and even for that, I'm, just even talking about clearing ancestral things, working with moving past the idea of you have to work with, certain people and certain things. And, all of us have a nice batch of shitty ancestors.
Mhm.
And just because they're there doesn't mean you need to work with them. And I think
Yeah.
that's so important. And I love, with your book, it's, and it even said it's a guide to building an ancestral veneration practice. I can't say it today. And and so I think it's so important for people who really want to start this work but are
Mhm.
afraid to dive into it to grab your book, because you break it down in such a way that it makes it practical,
Mhm.
doable, and it takes that scary and, like, because I think we all too get so tied up in the internet, obviously, and Instagram, like people with these huge altars that are just
Wow.
beautiful and
Yeah.
spooky and all of these things. And a lot of them do make it out like you have to have that in order
Mhm.
to have a practice. And obviously, right? That's not true. And I have to show you because I'm a dork and I have, look at my cute little star sticker that
Oh,
I
look at
use for
those.
my
I love
notes.
it.
Look it. So I
I love
starred
it.
your book up,
Oh,
and I'm a
thank
Libra.
you.
I can't help it. I like pretty things. It's just what happens. It's just what
Thank
happens.
God for Romeo and Michelle creating Post-it notes, right?
Right. It's just one of those things. So, before we even start into this,
Mm.
I really like to learn a little bit more about your mentor, David,
Mhm.
because I know that he was a big influence
Yes,
for this book. So, can you tell us a little bit
absolutely.
about him?
So, David, and I'm not going to say his last name for privacy stuff, but he's a priest of Oshun. He's also been part of the pagan community for nigh on like 30 years, right? So he's up here in Ontario. I'm no longer his godchild because I left I left that form of relationship mainly because I'm moving to the UK. It didn't
Okay.
make sense to really bind myself to that tradition, but
Mhm.
we're still friends. There's no break there. Um, so David is a priest of Oshun. I think he's coming up to 20 years of being crowned with Oshun. Oshun is Yoruba Orisha in the Lukumi / Santeria tradition. And what that means is that he literally is involved with Oshun. So he doesn't just worship her. He and her are connected in very intimate spiritual relationship.
Mhm.
And so when I was starting to look to do psychotherapy training, around that time, it was weird how it happens because originally I had met him when I was 13 at a sci-fi convention up here in Ontario because he was working it. And I hadn't, like, for years, like afterwards, I was like, when people get logged in your head and the image of that person. So when I met him again, he seemed really familiar, and I just couldn't put it, like, what is this? And we got talking a couple of years later, and he said, oh, and I used to do this thing. I was like, oh, okay, I know who you are now. So it's weird how those connections, right?
Yeah.
So I started psychotherapy training 2017-ish. Yeah, it's 2017. And at that time, I was living about 3.5 hours commute from Toronto. I was living with my parents. It just wasn't going to make sense to
Yeah.
do that, even though it was just weekends. So David was like, well, I have a spare bedroom. My partner and I, we would love to have a roommate. Why don't you move in? So I ended up moving in with him for 2.5 years.
Oh, wow.
And so David, like anybody who's involved with any kind of African traditional religion, whether it be voodoo, espiritismo, lukumi, or palo, They live their tradition. There is a lived element. You can't just sit in an armchair and think about these things. There are
Right.
spirits that need to be taken care of. There are rituals that need to be performed. Like it's just one of those things.
Mm-hmm.
And so living with him, his partner, and his Orishas, really, I got a sense. I saw things that I would never see if I didn't live in an environment like that. And
Right.
one big element of Lukumi in most African traditions, I would say most traditions around the world, is that element of ancestral connection, really that foundation piece.
Mm-hmm.
So, being part of those seances, being part of those, sorry, I'm burping here, being part of those ritual on a daily basis, because ancestral work in most of these traditions is not just a one time a year, right? It is every single day that these ancestors walk with you in the same way that your spirits walk with you. And that really impacted then that idea of seeing them here now all the time. I'm not just remembering my ancestors, I'm acknowledging that they have a direct hand in my life right now. If I need to speak to my ancestors, I go to my Egun shrine and I talk to them, and they're there, right? If
Mm-hmm.
I need to acknowledge, like if I need help in my life, I can go to my deities, I can go to my spirits, I can go to my ancestors, because they're all here now. They're not always around, they can be called, they have their own existences, they're doing their own things, but um, it's not like the Western and specifically the pagan way of looking at things, which is, oh, the ancestors come back around Samhain and then, that's the best time to connect with them, right? We're not looking at them from that Western kind of Judeo-Christian sense that they're in an afterlife somewhere inaccessible. They have a direct hand in the world now. And so I saw that in my own life, right? I went through a period, a year, where so many people came back into my life, and one of the theories is that was instituted by my spirits and my ancestors to get me back to a place of health in my life, to get myself back onto the road again.
Right.
And it was visceral, and it was one of those weird things like WYRD, way of, in retrospect, putting all the pieces together, little coincidences that built suddenly to be unveiled to be a big thing. And one of the readings I got was that some of my ancestors were involved in some of those pieces. So that really informed my book a great deal. One of the issues, though, and I mean, David is a white Western background as well, but he's been involved in these traditions for such a long time. He's essentially become Cuban in thinking and practice.
Right.
One of the things that always became an awkward thing for me was all of the rituals of Lakumi are geared towards the ancestors of the Middle Passage. When we put down offerings at the shrine, all of the elements, the symbols, the offerings on there have some sort of a unique or meaningful connection to the experience of the ancestors of the Orisha community in Cuba and Brazil, right?
Yeah.
So where were my ancestors in that? Like they were there, obviously they
Right.
were there, but it didn't, like the symbols weren't meaningful for me, and so I was encouraged to, develop my own relationship with my own ancestors, my own biological ancestors at first, and then I expanded that,
Right.
using symbols and that were meaningful to both of us.
Okay.
So instead of coffee, which is a really highly charged thing in the Caribbean, I
Yeah.
offer tea, because tea is a culturally very important thing for my background, right?
Right. Right. Right.
So it allowed me, and there were other things going on. There were many other influences too. A lot of people I was
Yeah.
connecting with at that time, but it really put me into that mindset of making this my own practice, because I'm the one who is connecting with them. It's about relationship building, and so
Right.
relationship became a big thing. I
Yeah.
hope that
Now,
answered the question.
oh my gosh, absolutely. And more, no, and I love that because I love that you even brought up the fact of, yeah, you were, you had like this full immersive experience, I mean, you couldn't get any more immersed in it than
Absolutely.
that.
Hmm.
And that, even though, you recognize that, yeah, these some of these things don't really kind of jive with me. They're not, and you, instead of just being like, oh, it's okay, it's fine, I'm just going to do it anyway, you took a moment and you're like, okay, how can I make this relate to me? And I think with a lot of people that it's so important that they think about that instead of just doing, okay, well, this is how they do it. So this is how I'm going to do it, whether it resonates or not, done deal. Right.
Mhm.
And then they're like, well, I don't know. My ancestors, I don't think they're here and I'm not getting any response. And they're wondering why. And
Mhm.
I think that's such an important point because you have to make it your own.
You have to make it your own. And anybody who reads tarot or oracle cards or Lenormand or any of those know this on an intrinsic level. There is a difference between having a deck of cards, laying out a reading, and keep going to the book,
Right.
versus knowing the cards intimately as individual characters within a grand story, how they're relating to each other, what is the drama going on, what is the soap that is happening in front of you with these cards, and knowing each of those cards individually and as a group, you get a sense of, okay, well, what's the message here? That's very different from opening a book and being like, okay,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, this says
Yeah.
this and this says that. And, total like tarot newbie thing. It's like when you first got it. And, I'm going to say the internet wasn't a thing when I first started reading tarot many months ago. And I just had a Rider Waite Smith deck and the little book. And you pull cards and you look at it and you read the meaning in the book. And you're like, I don't know how any of this relates to each other. Like, I don't know what this is.
Mm-hmm.
But once you started really kind of getting to know them and doing all of that, like, and it does
Yeah.
relate to ancestral work too. It's
Oh,
it's
yeah.
all putting that puzzle all together, but not
Absolutely.
just anybody, your own puzzle,
That's the key
but
thing right there.
that
Your own story is involved in it, right? And I think in some ways, this is why it's so difficult for particularly the pagan community. This is written for anybody of any community,
mhm,
but it is really geared towards the pagan community because the pagan community is coming in. And often I hear this issue of, oh, well, what do you do with the ancestors? Because you can't work with them magically because they're not like they're not ingredients, right?
yeah,
You can't. What am I trying to say? There's a lot of issues of religious trauma in this community, and
yes,
that often creates a barrier because of an assumption that, well, my great great grandmother is not going to want to work with me because she was a devout Catholic, right? So
right,
who am I suddenly? Certain things transcend, right? But it's fascinating when you actually ask people what ancestors do you work with or what ancestors do you venerate. Oftentimes, the collection of ancestors that people choose for themselves that they feel comfortable working with tells you a great deal more about who they are than anything to do with their ancestors, right?
yeah. No, I that's actually really true. Yeah, if you
Hmm.
really sit and think about it, and
Yeah.
and then I think too, I mean, and I guess that would be more in a teaching sense, or if you're, helping somebody, just even asking them why and letting
Uh-huh.
them kind of stew on it. Like that's like a whole
Yeah.
journal exercise right there too,
It
because they
probably
may
is.
not even realize why they're choosing this person until they start, working with them, and or if they really just sit and think about it, because we do that all
Yeah,
the time. We make these choices and we're like,
totally
yeah,
do.
that's just what I want to do. Somebody asks why, and then you're like, because.
Yeah. Well, and it's the same with working with tarot, right? There are
Yeah,
probably particular cards that you really love. Whenever that comes up, there's something about that card. Same with anybody. Like mine,
yeah,
for example, I love the tower. I don't know why. There's just something
yeah.
about the tower that
I did
it just does
too. I'm
something.
so glad you said that.
Oh,
I love the tower and the swords, and everybody's like,
oh,
huh? What? I'm like,
why?
yeah.
Right?
But
Exactly right.
that's like
Yeah.
when the good stuff happens, and I guess, it's kind of more the cerebral, part
Yeah.
of things. So, I'm just shifting through my stars here.
It's all good. All good. Well, and for me, like the tower is I love the tower because I've lived the experience of my foundations being shattered and my whole life falling apart and
Yeah,
rebuilding, right?
I
I've
don't
I've
do it.
lived that experience. And so for me, the tower is that reminder of myself that I can rebuild myself and that things are going to be okay. And I
Yeah,
know a lot of people don't see it that way, but that's
right,
how I connect with it, right?
right.
So it's
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
No, it is. And I do, and that is very similar how I really think of it. And,
Mm-hmm.
when people put, you pull it up, and if anybody has it, like, oh, no," and I'm like, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
but you know what? That means something better is like on the way, and that we're all a bunch of stubborn asses.
Yeah.
And unless that tower happens, you're just going to be stuck in the same old thing. So,
Exactly.
it's very, very, I don't know. I think it's a very profound card, but not in the way that most people think, in that type of
Yeah.
way. But so I just wanted to touch on a little bit too,
Mhm.
is you talk about Rain chapter 1, it's the nature of living is the name of the chapter. And it's understanding death. And I
Yes.
think, I am somebody, I consider myself a death worker. And so I think this is such an important thing. And I love that you did this right off the bat. Like,
Mhm.
okay, let's start here. So why don't you share a little bit with us about, your understanding of death and what you want people to embrace about it?
I start with that because so much like that's a real foundational world building paradigm, and
Mhm.
everybody is different in that way.
Right.
You, to me, you can't build a living practice if you don't answer that question for yourself. Because if you're thinking about death, well, you have to figure out, okay, what is death? But
Right.
often death is contrasted with what life is. And so if you don't answer what life actually is, then you can't figure out those other questions. Um, and so for me, death is I've come to a place where I see death as a kind of kind of the shadow aspect of life, right?
Mhm.
But it's a transitionary piece, just like life is a transitionary piece. So I do feel I do ascribe to the idea of reincarnation for myself. I'm not suggesting anybody needs to take that up for themselves.
Right.
My own worldview is that we are continually evolving as
Mhm.
spirits, individual spirits towards some goal. I'm not sure what that goal is, but that's how I feel. And
Yeah.
so death is that kind of it's like in the cyclical, right? The day and then the sun's journey through the night
Mhm.
to be reborn again and go on and so on. So death is a journey as much as life is a journey. Um, I don't know what that looks like. I don't know what that feels like. I can only guess. But I do believe that there's multiple parts that make up who I am. Just like I am who I am in this life because of all of these elements that have contributed to who I am now in
Right.
death, right? Only parts of those will continue on a journey. But I don't think that those pieces that are left behind just kind of are left behind to rot, because the reality of the ancestors for me says that these personalities exist in some form in a continuation. But I think that death exists and operates in a way that is so different from how life is. And so, for, like going through this, I learned a lot about death.
Mhm.
Ironically, I've never experienced death fully myself. I haven't lost my parents. I've only lost my pets, my grandparents, right? Um, but interestingly, when I was writing this, in the span of 2 weeks, two people very physically close to me passed on.
Oh
One
wow.
person decided to take, well, no, two people actually, both of them decided to take that decision for themselves.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it was quite profound. It was
Yeah.
quite profound. But it was that that feeling I got wasn't that they were gone. This is why I know that the ancestors and the dead are
Mhm.
still connected with us living. And
Right.
all of our folklore, all of our ghost stories, all of our, like, even, spiritual experiences tell me that, right? So
Right.
for me, death is no longer the fearful thing it used to be. But then I'm not even sure that death always was that fearful state of being, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think, I mean, especially, here, just in the US, we've made death such a weird thing.
Hmm.
I mean, we've made it so weird. And in my former life, I'm a nurse. I still have my license. I don't practice anymore. But so I saw a lot of it. I did see a lot of it. I worked in OBGYN, so I worked with babies and children, so I did see that side of it too. And it was always so interesting to me how, as a society, like we wanted to like hide everything. Like we just want to, oh well, especially if it was a young person, hide them away. Okay, we don't want, you know what I mean. And I was the complete opposite. And that's kind of what I did on the floor. I was the counselor for that, and so I mean, my approach was very different. It's seemed to work well. They didn't fire me, so that was always good. But and also too, one thing when if I was doing home care and the
Mhm.
person in like a hospice type situation, the person was getting ready to pass on, but it was like they weren't going. They weren't going. They weren't going. The first thing I always did was I looked around the room and saw what pictures were in the room. Most times they put all the pictures of the people that are living.
Yes.
And I'm like, okay, I'm going to ask you guys to do something. And
Mm.
I'm not sure how you're going to feel about it, but I want you to change those pictures to the people that are no longer here.
Yeah.
Because I just felt, even though maybe they weren't aware, their eyes, but it's like that energy of that. Like, then they're like, well, I don't want to go because look at all these people I'm leaving. Instead of
Yes.
look at all these people that are going to
You
meet,
can see.
you
Yeah.
know? And I always thought that was just such an interesting thing and something that, that was just kind of taught into us, all.
Mhm.
And so I think too, by doing that and by just thinking about, that type of thing, and yeah, you know what, you're meeting them on this. It's so, again, it's like what you said, it's that continuation instead of
Absolutely.
that ending.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you look at cultures around the world, this is where like the individualism of the West and the fear of that this is going to end, that I'm going to go, everything I've done will mean nothing, is a really socially fearful thing as individually, right? But
Right.
if you come from a culture where you like the Day of the Dead down in Mexico, right? If you come from a culture where you know that even when you die, you'll have a chance to come and visit your family a year from now, right? That they
Right.
will erect an altar and place all those beautiful pictures of all the people that you've joined on in the afterlife, right? Then I feel like that is going to take away that fear.
Yeah.
And people have said in those cultures where like the in Sulawesi in Indonesia, there's a tradition that I just absolutely love, and they keep the dead body with them in the family for perhaps years because they're coming up with funds to do a funeral, but that body is treated like it's like it's still living. So the belief is that it's still animated with that spirit. It's treated as though the animate spirit is still in there. And one of the women who were interviewed, she said, um, I'm a Christian, but I feel like that he's still here, and I feel like for grief, anyways, that's helped me with my grief because I have just this a little bit more time to say goodbye.
Yeah.
I can process with him here. I can talk to him. I
Mm-hmm.
can say what my final things are, right? You have a lot more time with the individual to
Right.
to finish and complete and move into a new form of life for yourself, right?
Right.
So it's a really interesting thing. And I mean, coming from a nursing background, how dark the humor is, and how that's often used by nurses to deal with patients who
Right.
are and clients who are to give you that time to normalize it for yourself, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And you do, you have to,
You
especially
have to. Mhm.
when I would work nights and I would have to go down to the morgue in the middle of the night at 2 a.m. in the basement of the hospital. That was scary
Yeah.
AF. And you're
Yes.
like, it's all gonna be okay. I'm not gonna get locked here, and I'm not gonna, and you move, and like a sheet moves off something. You're like, okay, I can do this. I can do this, and you do, and you make, and and it's not at all in a disrespectful way, but like you said, it's more of a coping mechanism than anything.
Yeah.
For sure. But I think too, it is important to really sit down with those questions. What is life?
Mhm.
What is death to you?
Yeah.
And how does that impact you? How do you feel, you can best benefit from an ancestral practice, and how
Absolutely.
how like, what do you want from it? Right?
This is
Like,
the
are we
thing.
just doing it to make it an Instagram pretty? Like, why are
Yeah.
you doing it?
Yeah.
You know?
Exactly.
Because I think the ancestors like to know that too.
Well, I mean, we would want to, right? When we're
Yeah.
dead, like I often like to think of it this way, and I've been in situations in big group pagan rituals, and this is a criticism, just so that people who are watching who think that I'm trying to be polite. This is a direct criticism of the spirit. Um,
FYI.
FYI,
I love that.
right?
Yes.
When ancestor work is done in big pagan events that I've experienced. Not all of them, but some of them.
Mhm.
It is often with that element of, well, we really should do an ancestral piece, right? So let's hold hands and think about the ancestors for 2 minutes before we move on to something a little more interesting,
Right.
right? And that element of disrespect there of, okay, well, you're showing directly that you don't know what to do with these ancestors.
Yeah.
So why are you inviting ancestors to the circle when all they're going to get from you is the 2 minutes of
Yeah.
hand holding,
And holding.
you
Yeah.
know? Right. That being said, I've also been part of pagan rituals where they were honored as part of a big feast, and it was a wonderful, it was a celebration, right? And so the
Mm-hmm.
ancestors were invited to be part of that. But
Yeah.
again, that's still that piece of, well, what do you actually do with the ancestors? And that piece, I think, is connected with this idea of like, so much of paganism is about magic, right?
Mm-hmm.
Getting something. What are we doing? What are we working with these ancestors for? As opposed to just enjoying their company. It would be like going over to your grandmother's house, a great grandmother's house,
Yeah.
and going into a parlor and sitting there and being like, I'm going to spend time with you because really I'm going to ask you for all this money. So let's just go
Right.
through it. Like,
Exactly.
just slap around the face.
Yeah. No, it is. And it is. And that is so important too, that not just working with them because you want something with them.
Exactly.
So for me, and this is, a relative, it was actually my godfather, and he had passed unexpectedly very young. So I do have an altar, and it's like, for me, I'm constantly just talking out loud
Yeah.
to whoever the hell is listening. So half the time, like, my kids don't even question me anymore. They don't even say what, because I'm like talking, and you're like, somebody's hanging out here, or someone's poking at, and I'm just so, I probably look totally insane, but I very much am working with all the things. But which, I know you get that.
I totally get that.
And so I do have, a spot for him, because he was before my husband came along, he was probably the only positive male influence I had in my life. And so it was very tragic when he died. So I do have an altar too for him, and I do just sit there, and I do just spend time and just hang out, like when I just feel like I need that, like his energy and his presence, and that's what I do. So
Mhm.
that is so very true, and you can do that, even with ancestors you haven't met, right?
This
And
is the thing. Yeah.
that's so important too. And I think, another aspect though too that I talk about a lot when I do teaching on it, and that I love that you mentioned that too, is if you're adopted.
Yes.
So
Mhm.
can you just talk about doing ancestral work when you are adopted a little bit?
Absolutely. And I think I talk about it in the book. If not, I've talked about it somewhere else.
Yeah, you do
Um,
talk about it. Because I noticed it,
yeah.
well, I was saying to Ben too before, I was like reading, and I love just his approach too, because it's very much, and I'm looking, I'm like, yeah, yeah, you got a star. Because it was like all stuff. I'm like, yay. So
Absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah. No.
go
No.
ahead. Adoption.
Well, no, no, no. It says it's so. This is one of the main questions, right? One
It
is
is.
what you do with the ancestors if they're Christian. The other is
Mhm.
what you do if you're adopted, right? And I think
Yes.
again, this is how culturally constructed so much of spirituality is, because when we think about life and death, right? That's very constructed worldview that we're operating from. But there's also the social worldview that we're operating from, which is how is the family constructed? How are relationships constructed, right? Now, if
Right.
I was on somebody else's podcast a few months ago, and we were talking about Jamaican culture, and we were talking about the concept of family in a lot of West African, a lot of traditions around the world, a lot of collectivist culture around the world, and this idea that your family is not just your mom, your dad, or your parents, I should say, and
Right.
siblings, and the core family. It's expansive,
Hmm.
aunties and uncles all over the place, right?
Yeah.
And that's because of the way that Western society has constructed the idea of the family. So this idea that it's we're privileging DNA relationship, and that we're privileging core family relationship. So that if you're adopted, then well, you're not really connected to these people. there's that whole like, oh well, you're not really theirs, right?
Right.
Which is bullshit,
It is.
because if you go back to ancient Rome, they're adopting adults left, right, and center, right?
Yeah,
Adoption
that's
is a
secret.
form of relationship. Yeah, it's true, right? Like, you
Right?
know, so it's one of those things where people ask, can I work with the ancestors of my adoptees, or who am I? That's the other key piece too.
Yes.
People, who am I? And we define ourselves through these really like weird, when you think about it, biological connections. Well, your DNA, strains of molecules inside of you, do not define who you are, but that relationship is social. So how I approach it in the book is twofold. One, explore the spiritual relationship to your adopted parents, right? But also on a social level, if you just look at ancestry through that biological lens, eventually what happens, it only takes like 10 generations, so 200, 300 years. Eventually, you'll have so many ancestors in a particular place that eventually it will be the story of the community as opposed to your individual family line.
Right.
So, this whole idea that, Genghis Khan, right, has is like one tenth of all Han Chinese is related to Genghis Khan. That's a huge number of descendants, right? But if you flip that and invert that, eventually it's the same thing. You think 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 8 great grandparents, 16 great 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 grandparents, and so on and so on.
Right.
There's this concept called genealogical breakdown, which is eventually you get back so far, I think it's like only 20 generations, and you have like quadrillions of ancestors, more people than existed at that time.
Right.
So what happens is this concept of genealogical breakdown is individuals will start to appear multiple times in the same tree, because their descendants had descendants who then came in and married each other. Right, especially when you're in particular areas. So if you know what area your ancestors came from, even if you don't know who they were, then chances are you can claim that that history
Right.
as your own, because all of your ancestors will be in that space in that time.
Right. I like that.
Right.
Like more in the community
Yeah.
sense than like an individual. Yeah.
Exactly.
No, that makes.
You know.
No, I like.
Yeah. But it tells us a lot about how we think of family. We, because of our society, right, what's really important is names. If we don't have a name, we don't have a face, we don't have a story, then those people don't exist. Right? That's not true for many cultures around the world who actively collect all of their ancestors together as one big mass. So they talk about the ancestors as the ancestors. Right? It's not just individuals within that space, right?
Right, definitely. And I think that's important too, because I feel that people, when they start working and they start kind of looking into ancestors and contacting, and people use various ways of divination to do that as well. And even when I've done readings for people, and I'm like, yeah, and we talk about ancestors, yeah, there's this one, and and you kind of give it this is kind of what they look like to me, and whatever, and they're like, well, what's their name? And it's like, well, I think once they're floating around wherever, they don't care about names anymore, and I think letting, and I feel like they don't think, a lot of people don't think it's real unless there's a name attached to it. But a lot of times on the other side, it's just so not important to them. It's just, just like time is so different. So it's definitely kind of letting that go as well. And I love, just that whole community aspect. And now that we have all these resources we can use, even if you do a DNA test or this, and that, and it's like, I mean, for me, when I had done, I've done a couple of them because I actually love genealogy, and like one of these days on my long list of things to do, I'm going to dive into it. One of these days. I am part Puerto Rican. So I, a lot of my ancestors come from Northern Africa, from Senegal, and there's just that piece of it, and it's the Yoruba, and I think I'm saying it right. And it's also too, like, you're like, oh well, can I research that? Can I look into that? Can I be a part of that?
mm,
And I've
mm.
talked to people and they're, of that descent, and they're like, yeah. They're like, it doesn't matter if you're 1% or 20%. You're it. And so that was something that was reassuring for me, because that's, again, on the list. That's another, with that, just really diving into that and understanding it and learning about it, because I do have that a connection to it.
Mm,
And I've always been very drawn to it. So it was very interesting to me to find that when I did that DNA and all
mhm.
that connection. And I don't know a lot about my family history.
Right.
I left home when I was 14. So, and I didn't stay with
Mm,
my parents. So, I just didn't have the access to all that information. So just doing that kind of stuff, and going with more of a community than individual people, that was also something that I
yeah,
wind up doing too. So I thought that I,
absolutely. Well, and I think that's a really good example of those situations where, we can learn to have relationship even if we don't have a context,
mm-hmm.
right? And how many people in the baking community have a similar story,
Yeah,
have a similar same with the queer community,
yeah,
right? How many people had to leave home when they were 14 because it wasn't safe for them,
absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
And and yet when you actually look at it, and I think maybe it's a generational thing too, people who are a little later in life, right, more older than 30, we're in a state of our lives where we're starting to think about our own legacy. We're starting to think about our own kind of imprint in the world, right? Because when you're 25 and drinking, you're doing smoking,
Yeah,
all
you
of
don't
it
care
doesn't
about
matter,
that.
right? Yeah,
You're
it doesn't
like, what's
matter, right?
going on tomorrow night?
Exactly, right? So I think that piece around, needing to have the name is what's left to us of these
Right.
people. And so we need to have our name left. And that's where it ties into that legacy piece.
Yeah.
And then I think you get to a point where it's just like, it doesn't matter
It,
because your legacy can be other things,
absolutely. Like, don't
right?
focus so much on that. Focus on the relationship building and more of that than worrying
Exactly.
about names and all of that. So, what about obviously people do ancestor altars and all of those things
Mhm,
work, and they work with certain deities.
mhm.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about how to approach that?
The relationship between the
Yeah, like
two
how to
types of
approach that, and
practices,
how to,
maybe.
I have, and I've had a lot of people, I'm sure you have too. They're like, well, I want to work with, a deity, but I don't know which one. How do I find one? And that sort of thing. Like, so how, I guess I'll reframe that as in, how do you find the deity that you want to work with, in an ancestral sense? We'll go with that.
Oh, that's a complicated question, and I have very strong opinions on
Oh,
that.
okay.
So
Woohoo!
to me, like again, it comes back to that question of,
Mhm.
well, even that want, that inclination tells you a lot about where that person
Yeah,
is. So the therapy hat comes on then, and it's like, well, what is it that you're wanting to get out of a relationship with a deity,
yeah,
right? What is it that you're hoping to get out of this? What is missing in your life that you're hoping that this figure will give you, right? Because I feel like, and it's the same with the ancestors, right? What is it that you're really hoping to get out of this relationship, right?
yeah,
And I think that there can be healthy and very unhealthy kind of answers to that. When it comes to the ancestors, I feel like a lot of people, like, this is really expanding that concept of ancestor here.
yeah.
A lot of people are looking for a father figure, mother figure, parent figure, right, in a deity. Oftentimes, at least in my case, I work with deities that I identify as having a hand in my life, right?
Hmm.
And they make themselves known. Um, Other deities I've just kind of fallen in, like I've fallen into their orbit, and I've just been trapped in their orbit, and I've been better for it, right?
Right.
So it's one of those things. I feel like, again, it comes back to that whole idea of worldview. What is it that you're hopefully, like? What are you looking for?
Yeah.
Um, how do you even conceptualize? Because in many traditions, deity and ancestor are separated. In many traditions, they're the
Right.
same, right?
Hmm.
And so, depending upon how you view that relationship, are they the same? Are they different? Are you looking for an ancestral deity? How do you even define deity, right?
Right.
So it's complicated,
It
and I
is.
know, I know, I
No,
know it
and
is.
it's
It's
good
complicated.
because those, and I think, you answered that perfectly, because it isn't as clear cut, as people want to make it. It's just
Yeah.
not. And that's another part of, I think, doing this work that people need to realize too. It isn't just popping up an altar, lighting some incense, throwing some
No.
wine or whatever out, and that's it.
Yeah.
There are, like, you really need to do work and really ask yourself these questions, because there
Absolutely.
are a lot of very unhealthy relationships with a lot
Yeah.
of these, and that is something that I think too, just even, generally in the pagan community, that we've come across a lot. And
Mhm.
sometimes it's encouraged for other people's gain, unfortunately, you know.
And this is the problem. This is this is the Protestant individualism, the capitalist, the industrialist piece, right? All those three things really coexist together.
Mhm.
That Protestant idea that spirituality is all about you, that capitalism piece, which is I need all the stuff in order to support that.
Right.
And then that individualism piece, which is, I need to be the witch of this place, or I need to be the head deity or the head priest of blah blah blah, right? All those things, because it's essentially filling a need here of I'm looking for connection.
Right.
And I think that ultimately this is where most, well, all people in the pagan community, they're looking for connection.
Yeah.
I think that's what it is. But how that connection is manifest is it really takes a great deal of individual heavy work. And that's why in this book, I don't give people a way to construct their altar. I don't give people a ritual to perform. I don't give them prayers to say. I say, go and find those things.
Yes.
And I'll give you a very good example. So I'm moving to the UK, hopefully by the end of this year.
Mhm.
I'm originally from the UK, but I have lived over in Canada for 29 years, right? So I'm more North American than I am British at this point. My connection to the gods of Britain is really twofold. I know that some of my ancestors connected with them way back thousands of years ago. I'm also looking at connecting with local saints, local spirits. I'm looking at getting to know the local population of the landscape that I'm moving into, including the people, including the spirits, including the gods, right?
Right.
So I'm looking to educate myself and build those relationships as a neighbor, as somebody who's going to be living there, as also a child of that space, because I see myself as a child of Britain in many ways,
Mhm.
right? Um, I'm connected ancestrally to that place. My ancestors had connections with these spaces, right? So for me, it's really a question of, it has nothing to do with me. Like, when I'm working with some of the Welsh gods, for example, some of them, it has nothing to do with me. It is entirely about me understanding my place in that community setting,
Right.
and respecting the boundaries of the pre-existing boundaries that are already there, right?
Mhm.
So in which case, I'm not going to worship Ceridwen because I'm getting something out of it. I'm worshiping Ceridwen because she's the big goddess of that area, and if I don't, pay respects, like going around meeting your neighbors,
Right.
right, building those relationships, right? And I think that it's a very different way of connecting with spirits, because in many ways I'm taken out of the equation,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And yet I'm still the one doing it.
Yeah.
I'm
You're
still engaging
practicing.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly,
Right.
right?
And and another thing, and maybe when you were saying that, it's something too. Like, I think, just, I say we, is it all of us? I don't care who you
Yeah.
are. It's not always all about us.
No.
And we really
No.
like to make it that way, but it's
Oh,
not. But it's
so
not. And
true.
doing the ancestral work. So yeah, like, generally it is about you because you're doing the work, like you said. But it's really not. And it's,
No.
again, building that legacy, building those connections, building those energetic ties, and making
Yeah.
them strong so that they last.
So that they
Yeah,
last,
they
that you also are the best instrument in that situation. So I've got a story on that. This is one reason why I have the weird bind rune tattooed onto my body. So I when I was really re-engaging with my spirituality again, especially when I was living with Padrino and David,
Mhm.
um, I had so many situations where it was demonstrated to me that I could be a pawn in a bigger, grander scheme, and I had no say in the matter. that I was going to be used for purposes that were outside and had nothing to do with me, and I just had to deal with that. I had a woman come in, so like all these weird things. Oh my god! So I was working at a bakery in Hamilton, Ontario, and Hamilton is this weird space where it's like multiple large mountains and then a city kind of in amongst them all.
Okay.
So there's I was working at this bakery, and this woman comes in, and we get chatting, and she was like she was there to buy some stuff because she was traveling around. And I happened to say to her, "Oh, by the way, are you Clara Hughes, one of the major Olympic people up here in Canada?" And she said, "No, but it's interesting. Why do you ask that?" So I said, "Well, you look like her, and there's actually a place quite close by where she lived in town that she would climb up to. It's called Clara's Lookout, and it was this beautiful big lookout looking over the city, it's beautiful, stunning spot." And she said, "Oh, no, but thanks for telling me that." So she went and didn't think anything of it. 20 minutes later, she came back in and she said, "Can I just say, I really appreciate that you asked me that and that you told me about Clara's Lookout. I need you to understand something. I'm a photographer and I was in town looking for spaces to do photography of urban landscapes. And you telling me about that was the perfect spot I was looking for. And I just needed that because I'm leaving tomorrow. So I really appreciate that." And I got this weird, nauseous feeling come on. I'm like,
Yeah.
stuff like that happens all the time to me now.
Yeah.
And it's ridiculous, and sometimes it's my ancestors coming in and being like, "No, no, no, in cahoots with other people's ancestors." Sometimes it's spirits doing that, and it's like, fuck's sakes.
Right, exactly. It is though, because it's like you're just going about your normal day, and it's like, boom! It's like, but wait,
Yeah,
okay. I guess I'm
yeah,
focusing on this now. Okay, never mind.
yeah.
It is.
Oh, it's so
It
weird.
is.
So a direct ancestral one here. So this is a really fun one. Now it's coming back to me. It was like, so while working at this bakery, a friend of mine up in Kitchener, which was an hour away, she ended up becoming my supervisor for my psychotherapy stuff
Mhm.
afterwards. So she was running a dumb supper, a silent cafe,
Yeah.
right? And so she invited me up, and I had never been to one of these before. And I was really excited. This was about 6 years ago, 7 years ago. And so I'm like, okay, well, I need to bring something with me because it was a potluck kind of thing.
Okay.
So I go and I get butter tarts, go up. And I come in and I'm like, "Oh, hey Tiff, how's it going?" And I go in. I think I talk about it in the book actually.
Mhm.
So I go in. She sees the butter tarts and she bursts out crying. I'm like, "Well, I mean, I know they're half price, but they're still good. Don't
They're
cry
not
enough."
stale, I promise.
She said, "No, no, no, no. You have to understand. This is really meaningful to me." She'd run another dumb supper earlier in the day, and her mum came through, but she was really hoping that her dad would come through.
Mhm.
And so me bringing the butter tarts in, butter tarts were his favorite dessert,
Oh, yeah.
right? Now I didn't know that,
Right.
and there was no possibility of me because there was a bakery, all sorts of different things. I just
You
happened
just
to get butter
grabbed
tarts.
whatever, right? Like, here, these
Exactly right.
work.
So in that moment, I was in it, and I had no intention, no inclination, no consent for it, but I was used in that way. And
Right.
this is what spirits often do. This, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
fuck? Yeah.
And I always I do like when it happens like that more organically,
Mm-hmm.
because sometimes you do get I do a lot of dream work, and I get so many messages during my dreams. Like sometimes, it's like you wake up and you're exhausted and you're like, really? I needed to sleep. But there are so many times too, like when you're talking to someone, and then you get like that picture in your head, or
Mm-hmm.
someone taps you, and then it's like deciding, do I say something, do I not say something, and that actually happened to me recently. I had a dream the other night, and this person had a baby boy, and and they called themselves baby boy because it must have been
Mm-hmm.
a loss of some sort, an early loss, and didn't have a name, and a whole bunch of blue butterflies. And I was like, crap, and I was talking to Jay, my husband. I'm like, do I say something, do I not say something? I'm like, I'm sitting on it, and honestly, I'm going to sit at my ancestral altar and kind of have powwow there and decide how, because I feel like it was very sensitive, and maybe people didn't know about it. So it was, it is just that, when something like that kind of happens organically, it kind of takes that pressure away. Like your ancestors are like, I'm going to do this for you, and I'm like, okay, good.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So, I think that's, it is interesting. And I think it is a benefit of working with ancestors and having that ancestral, kind of team
Absolutely.
with you, because sometimes they know that it might be something that you're going to struggle with. So they just kind of step in for you and do it. And I think that's kind of awesome.
It is, and oftentimes, at least my experience is now that I'm becoming a lot more aware of it and fine-tuned to it, I know from a weird perspective when things are happening around me and I need to either stay in place and just like stay out of the way,
Right.
or that there's something I need to do. Like I need to go in a certain direction. I don't know what, but there's guidance there, right?
Right.
Um, but I think that oftentimes this happens to everybody, and we never are given that information. We're never given that kind of what do you call it? That context, right? We just play roles,
Right.
and we never know, and that's okay because we're not supposed to know because it's
Right.
not about
We're
us.
not. It is. It's true. It's
Yeah,
true. And it's like, even like me having, it's almost like at that point, then I'm worried about. So it's like, I'm trying to make it mine and it's not
yeah,
mine. So I'm trying to separate that. Meanwhile, it was one of those times like, why didn't you guys step in?
yeah,
Like, where were
yeah.
you? But we don't ask those questions. But I mean, I think though that's why it's so important to build this ancestral practice,
Yeah.
and because it also does help to get help you become more in tune with yourself, with your
Absolutely.
abilities and the things that you use, and maybe things that you weren't using because you were scared to, and then now
Yeah.
having kind of that backup team to kind of help you out and direct you, it does help you to be more confident in your own abilities.
This is the thing, and I do strongly believe that it's an altruistic sense, right? The ancestors are trying to get us to where we are the best potential future ancestor, right? The healing that I've done over the past 8 years, the direction, all of this amazing stuff I've been doing has been guided. Like I do feel like there's been like the opportunities have come to me when they needed to come to me. It might feel like I'm stumbling around through life, but like there's a method to that madness, and
Right.
I like even going back to school was a whim. Like I just looked up one day, like it was like late November 2 years ago, and I was like, I didn't intend to go back to school, but I was like, well, why not? I just got that little inclination, so I started looking, and when I actually looked into it, I was like, oh, I could be in school in like 3 weeks.
Right, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Okay.
In
Yeah.
that moment, it was like, duh. And I had to like similar situation a couple of weeks ago. Like I was freaking out last week because my business license had expired, and I was like, oh god, oh god, oh god, what? Like, so I went through all of this, and I had some issues I needed to deal with like getting a pin from the government, and that was denied because I didn't have this document or whatever, right? And
Yeah.
then like I got the inclination to look up something, and the website just popped up, and it was a government website, and apparently I don't need to have a business license because I'm practicing under my own name. So I'm like, I don't even need to freak out right now because this is all resolved.
Exactly. They were all like, all right, we need to do something with him because he's taking a hard left.
He's
We
doing it. He's hit.
He's
Yeah.
steering the ship right now. I
The
love that.
wine's going to be open soon.
It is. No, it's definitely, there are so many pluses to having this practice.
Yeah.
And we are at an hour, and
Oh,
honestly, I could just keep going. So we'll have to continue another time and
I
have a
would
whole
love that. I would
discussion.
love
But
that.
this was a lot of fun. But why don't you go ahead and tell everybody where they can find
Yeah.
you, all of your things, and
Absolutely. So everything is on my website, benstimpson.com. My podcast, all of my social media, information about my book, my services, everything's on there. So, and I'm running a podcast. I'm hoping that we can get you on there sometime soon.
yes, see, there we
Yeah,
go. Then
I
and
will.
our conversation continues. See, it all works out.
Love
But
it. I love it.
yes, and so Ben's book is available now at all your favorite bookstores. So definitely go ahead and check it out. And also, as authors, we ask you, we beg you, we plead for you to leave a review.
Yes.
It takes just a few minutes, and reviews are really important for our publisher as well. We both have the same publisher, Llewellyn. And it's really important for them too, because it helps them to order books. It helps them to kind of work on marketing. It's all those things. And it also helps us authors. So it really takes just a few minutes. And it's very, very important to do that. And we will love you forever. And I always say, every time someone reviews, a baby unicorn is born. So let's repopulate the unicorns, please.
Well, we're not too many of them, so we need more. So
exactly. Well, thank you so much for coming
thank you.
on.
Thank you.
I'm glad this finally happened, and you were the first interview.
Oh, it's exciting.
I love that. Woo!
Oh.
If I had glitter to throw, I would throw it. All right. Thank you, everybody, for stopping by as well. And go ahead and give Ben a follow on all his things too, and support. Let's just support all the things, because that's what we do here.
Thank you. I
All right,
appreciate
guys.
that.
Have a great day. I appreciate all of you, and I will talk to you all soon. Oops. All right.